Good morning, Swampscott. You know, it's really, really good for me to be back here. I do this so often. I travel up and down the East Coast mainly now, and I speak at schools just like this. And coming back to a place like this where I feel so welcome really does mean a lot to me. In the last 4 years of me doing this, I've spoken to over 100,000 kids. And when I came here last year, I didn't go over the numbers and all that stuff, but to me, what I probably did say is what I always say. And my hope is to impact one kid in here today. The middle school, the amount of kids that were impacted by what I shared, and more importantly, what I know that a lot of you are going through in here. You may be going through it, and you're just too afraid to speak up, and that's how I was too. And I think what's important now is, before I really get into this, is to know, especially for the kids who have heard me before, maybe there was something last year that you resonated with, and I hope that maybe this year you'll hear something slightly different and speak up. Because I was here all day last year, and the amount of kids that came forward throughout the day, it meant a lot to me. And it means a lot to the people in here who want nothing but the best for you. You see, the thing is, I do this because kids come up to me all the time and talk about what they're going through. I do this for the kid in this room right now. It wakes up every single day, looks at themselves in the mirror, and hates who they see in the reflection. You know, as much as I do this, it doesn't get easy for me. You know, I speak numerous times a week at schools just like this, and it gets draining at times. But I do this because it's important to have these conversations. Because when I sat in high school, I had the same exact mentality that many of you have. I sat in the auditorium just like this, and I laughed with my friends. This guy doesn't know who I am. He doesn't know what I do. All we do is drink and smoke. You see, the thing is, many of you who have heard my story know that I go into opiate addiction. And many of you who have heard my story think it's never going to be you because you haven't gone down that path. Maybe you haven't been exposed to opiates or harder drugs. But what I know for a fact is there's a kid in this room right now that every single day you wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is hit a pen before you even get out of bed. There's a kid in this room right now that hits a vape before they even go to the bathroom in the morning. And all day long, you walk into the bathrooms of this school, and you hit vapes and carts in the stalls. The last thing you do before you go to bed at night is you hit that vape and that pen. And you think it's a joke. You think it's a joke. The amount of kids I see right now laughing, I'm astounded, to be honest with you. Because the thing is, I had a little girl last session that came up to me. And that little girl shared how kids in her middle school are vaping and hitting carts in the bathroom. There are kids in her middle school who think it's a joke. And this girl's mom died of a heroin overdose. You see, every single person in my shoes who's sober, who's fortunate enough to tell their story, every single person in my shoes started the exact same way that you all start. You all start with drinking and smoking on a Friday night, Saturday night. You all start with the vaping now, the carts now. And I think that many of you lose sight of the fact that my story could happen to any one of you. For the kids that have heard my story already, there's going to be a little bit of repeat in the beginning. But for the freshmen who didn't hear me last year, just like some of you, I wanted to skip this talk. And just like some of you, I thought I was too good for this talk. And the seniors who are sitting in here today, when I was your age, I didn't think this was going to be my story. Because at that point in my life, all I did was drink and smoke. Every single weekend with my friends, all I did was drink and smoke. But on a day just like this, just 23 years ago, my life changed. Because on a day just like this, 23 years ago, at 9 years old, I got put out of my 4th grade classroom. And 23 years ago, I walked into the hallway of my middle school where I saw my brother Nick, who was 7 years old. And when I walked into that hallway with my teacher, and I saw my brother Nick standing there with his teacher, my teacher and my brother's teacher huddled together and whispered something to each other. And they told us that a small plane hit my dad's building. They were evacuating the tower, and that my dad was safe. And that day, 23 years ago, was September 11, 2001. You see, the thing is, at 9 years old, in an instant, my life changed. And I didn't even know it yet. At 9 years old, my teacher and my brother's teacher had no idea. They had no idea that at 8:46 in the morning when Flight 11 hit my dad's building, my dad had no way out. My teacher had no idea that 3 minutes after the plane hit my dad's building, my dad called my mom to say goodbye. And those 2 phone calls to my mom where he said goodbye, 2 of those phone calls would torment me. You see, those 2 phone calls to my mom lasted 30 seconds, the most, 10 seconds. My dad called, my uncle, my dad's brother got through to my dad and said goodbye to him too. And those 3 phone calls total tormented me. But the one to my mom where he knew that he wasn't going to get out of that building, where he said goodbye and that he loved my mom, that tormented me. For the first time in my life at 9 years old, I felt different. At 9 years old, I sat in my school for the rest of the day, and I watched as moms and dads ran into my school. I watched as they pulled my friends, my classmates out of school one by one. And I wondered, why am I not leaving school? Why is my mom not running into the school to take me out to go home? My dad works in the World Trade Center. Why are these kids all getting to leave early? I didn't know at 9 years old that my mom was trying to preserve my last chance of an innocent childhood. Because when I got home from school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my life was uprooted before my eyes. When I ran inside my house and I ran through the kitchen corridor to the TV room, where my mom 6 hours earlier watched the footage unfold on live TV, and I saw the footage from that day with family, friends, and family members huddled around that TV, and I watched my dad's building on fire. I watched the second plane hit the second building. I watched both buildings coming down, and when they did, the family friend who had the remote changes the channel. She taps on that remote, and when she does, it goes to a Spanish news station. And on that Spanish news station, I see an image of someone falling to their death. You couldn't prepare me for seeing that at 9 years old. You couldn't prepare me for what would cause the most visceral reaction from me as a child. To see someone falling to their death from a building I had been in countless times. You see, at 9 years old, I didn't know that over 200 people broke open in windows that were 18 inches wide. And so desperate for one breath of fresh air, hundreds of people stacked on top of one another in those upper floors of the North Tower. Hundreds of people poked their heads out of a building 1,300 feet in the air. Hundreds of people were facing death before their eyes. They had no way out of that building. And over 200 of them fell or jumped out of that building. And at 9 years old, I thought my dad could have been one of them. You see, in another life, any one of you could be telling this story, just like I could be hearing it. In another life, I didn't live this nightmare. But as a child, no one could have prepared me for what was going to happen next. You see, the thing is, where I feel we go really wrong when it comes to drug addiction and prevention is what they did when I was a child. You see, when I was your age and younger, I walked into my health classroom, and the police from my town would walk in, and they'd show us videos and PowerPoints, videos from the 70s and 80s, talking about addiction, talking about cocaine, heroin, crack, meth, and they would try to scare us. And they would tell us that weed and alcohol are gateway drugs. They would show us images of people as they got to the end, the bottom, as we call it. But they would never talk about how they even began in the first place. You see, for me, I grew up in a nice town, an affluent town, a small town in New Jersey. If you had asked anyone who knew me when I was growing up, they would never think that I was going down the path that I was going down. They would never picture me as the kid who would make his mother cry every single night. But when I was a child and when I was your age, they never asked me why I was doing it in the first place. And that's what I hope we can do today. I hope that the kids in this room right now who are struggling, and that struggle can be immense, but that struggle can hit a multitude of different themes. The amount of girls that walk up to me after a presentation, they roll up their sleeves and they show me the scars up and down their arms. I can't tell you how many kids have talked about self-harm to me over the last year. But there's kids in this room right now who have a loved one. They have a parent, a sibling, or they themselves are struggling, and they can't stop. There are kids in this room right now who know for a fact that cart that they used to smoke here and there with their friends is getting out of control. And my hope is that we can all sit here today and identify why we do it in the first place. What is it that you're trying to escape from? What are you running away from? For 5 years, from 9 to 14 years old, every day I struggled with the thought of what happened to my dad inside that building. For 5 years, I wondered to myself if I found the answers that I've been so desperately trying to seek. I wondered if it would give me peace and closure. For 5 years, I looked at images every single day of people falling to their death from that building. For 5 years, I looked at images of people hanging out of the windows of the North Tower. And I thought to myself, if I found my dad in one of those photos, it would give me peace and closure. Innately, I know who I am as a person. If I found one photo back then, it would never give me peace and closure. I know that now. But then I didn't know that. You see, then my life revolved around asking my mom and my dad's brother, my uncle, what happened to my dad inside that building, or what they thought happened to him. The two of them conversed amongst each other and said, these conversations that he's having with us, this is too much. This is too powerful. And they cut off all communications. And they were right, because at 14, 15 years old, the thoughts I had in my mind, it was leading me down a bad path. The thing is, I had someone who stepped into my life that took advantage of me. And that uncle, through marriage, lied to me and told me everything that I wanted to hear. You see, the thing is, last year I probably shared the exact same sentiment. There's a kid in this room right now, and there was last year, but there's a kid in this room right now who's going to resonate with what I'm about to share. Because when I got sexually abused by that uncle at 14 years old, going to an all-boys prep school in New Jersey, playing soccer at that all-boys prep school, there was no way I was going to come forward about that. There was no way I was going to speak up. At 14, 15, 16 years old, I buried every single feeling and emotion inside of me. I used drugs and alcohol all throughout my high school years to cope. And the thing is, I get asked all the time, what influenced me in the first place? You see, if you asked me back then, I would tell you it was because I was trying to escape how I felt. I know the truth now. Every single time I drank and smoked, the first times I did it, I gave in to peer pressure. I did it because I wanted to fit in. I know for a fact that there are numerous kids in this room right now who resonate with that sentence. There are some of you in here right now who don't want to drink and smoke, but you feel obligated and pressured to do it on a weekend with your friends. There are some of you in here right now who hit a Nick vape because you want to do it with your friends, right? And I bet there are some of you in here who can remember the first time you hit that vape and the buzz that it caused. And you're chasing that same feeling over and over and over again, trying to feel it again, and you never will. So every single day you hit that vape all day long, desperately trying to feel that feeling again. And you hit it harder and longer and longer and longer and more often, and it doesn't give you that same feeling. That's what addiction is. It's chasing the same feeling over and over again, hoping that you're going to have the same result. And the insanity around it is that you never will. You see, we don't talk about the fact that kids are struggling in more ways than I struggled in high school. We don't open up the pathway for conversations for kids to speak up about how they feel. We don't talk about what's going on inside of ourselves because we're afraid of what people will think. We judge ourselves before we give people the opportunity to even judge us in the first place. So when I went in my high school, walking the halls with a smile on my face every single day, no one knew. No one knew that that kid got sexually abused. I never let anyone close enough to know, to even have an inclination that that could have happened to me. We all have something that's going on inside of ourselves. We all have something that's driving us to want to fit in, to want to be just like everyone else. And all of a sudden, so many of you who've known each other since you were little kids, all of a sudden, drugs and alcohol have to come into the picture. All of a sudden, drugs and alcohol have to be involved for you to have fun. We shift. And all of a sudden in high school, we get uncomfortable in our own skin. What's going on inside of us that we need to do that? No one sat me down when I was in high school and asked me what was going on. Every weekend when I got in trouble with my mom would catch me smoking. My mom would catch me coming home from going to a party and smelling like alcohol. She asked me two things. Where did I get it from and how much did I do? She never sat me down with everything that she already knew that I had gone through and asked me, what is it that you're trying to run from? Why are you trying to escape? And that's what I wish she had done. Because for 4 years in high school, no one knew how badly I was struggling. No one knew that every single day I'd come home from school and I'd go on the family computer and I'd type in 9/11 people jumping to their death, 9/11 people hanging out of the windows. My counselors got super close to me and I'd talk about my dad's death and the impact that it had on me, but I never talked about my obsession. I never talked about the fact that my life revolved around trying to figure out what happened to my father. And every single weekend, Friday afternoon, I'd leave my high school in that jacket and tie. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd leave that school, looking forward to that party that night. The kid that would leave my high school on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock was a completely different kid on a Friday, Saturday night. And I'd drink and smoke with my friends all weekend long. Black out every single weekend. And Monday morning, come back to school like nothing ever happened. You see, the problem is, the signs were there back then. I was escaping and sacrificing for drugs and alcohol before I even wanted to admit it. Because my senior year of high school, I was given an opportunity to be starting on that varsity soccer team that I wanted so desperately since I was a freshman, to be the starting forward for that team. And we just won states the year before. And my excuse for not going on the varsity team, for turning it away, was because I hated the coach. The reality is, I couldn't run a mile the way I used to because I was smoking too much. I sacrificed for drugs and alcohol in my senior year of high school, and I never admitted it back then. But on paper, everything was the same. On paper, the straight-A student, the kid walking the halls with all the friends in the world, that was all the same. The straight-A student, the kid who had all the friends, no one knew how badly he was struggling. I could sit with my closest friends, and I know for a fact there's a kid in here that knows this same feeling, that relates to this feeling, that I could sit with my closest friends and feel so alone. Those kids never knew the real me. They only knew what they saw as I walked those high school halls. And I graduated from my prep school, a straight-A student. Getting into Villanova, my dream school, top 5 business program in the country at the time. And my freshman year of college, I struggled immensely. My freshman year of college, I couldn't keep up with my grades the way I did in high school. And 6 months into my freshman year of college, I got introduced to a little orange pill. And I popped that 20 milligram Adderall pill. 20 minutes later, after swallowing that pill, I never felt so stimulated before in my life. I never felt so awake and alert. And I texted the kid who gave it to me, and I said, this stuff is amazing. Why doesn't everyone do this? He said, it's college. Everyone does. So I would go on to pop that pill every single day for 2 weeks straight. But for me, I have ADD. My whole childhood, my adolescence, they wanted me taking those medications, and I didn't take them because I had good grades. So for 2 weeks straight, taking that pill every single day, after a while, it absorbed into my body. And after a while, I didn't get that euphoric feeling anymore. So I started taking that little pill and breaking it down and snorting it. And when I started snorting that Adderall, I didn't like the feeling of being up and wired and stimulated. I like to smoke weed and feel mellow with my friends. So I stopped snorting those pills. And one night I smoked a joint with my best friend, a kid who I've known since I was 7 years old. He was my roommate in college. We smoke a joint, we go back to our dorm room, we sit down, we start playing FIFA. And about 20 minutes later, another kid walks into our dorm room, and from his pocket, he pulls out a baggie. And in that baggie are 20 or 30 of these little baby blue pills. And from that baggie, he pulls out one of those little baby blue pills and holds it up just like this. And I could barely see the thing. And with this huge smile on his face, he asked me, "Have you ever heard of these before?" I said, "No, what is it?" He said, "They're called blues. It's like your stone, but better. Just try it." He puts that 30 milligram oxycodone tablet on the desk and breaks it in half. Slides me 15 milligrams, slides 15 milligrams over to himself. I pulled out a $20 bill from my pocket, which is what it was going to cost me to buy that pill. And when I took that 20 and put it over it, and I took the credit card and I crushed it down and I chopped it up, I flipped that 20 over, I scraped off the rest of the residue. And from that, I made a line, I rolled up that 20 and I snorted that 15 milligrams. That one decision changed my entire life. At 19 years old, I gave in to peer pressure again. And at 19 years old, snorting 15 milligrams of oxycodone on a dorm room desk would turn into 900 milligrams a day of oxy for me. You see, the scariest thing of all was after I snorted that 15 milligrams. 5 to 10 minutes later, I had never felt so free. I had never felt so removed from who I was. I wasn't the kid who lost his dad 9/11 anymore. I wasn't the kid who was abused. For the first time ever, I felt like I could fit in. And for the first time ever, I could shut off all those emotions I had inside of my body. And I knew in that moment I was going to chase that feeling forever. And that's what I did. You see, I think kids hear that I talk about opiates and painkillers, and they automatically relate or try to relate and say, well, that's not going to be me, because I know the dangers. But there are kids in here right now who promised themselves that they weren't going to drink and smoke the way they do today. There are kids in here right now that have broken every single vow and promise that you've made to yourself. And the thing is that's scary to me. There are some of you who have younger sisters, younger brothers, younger cousins who want nothing in the world just to be just like you. Those kids idolize you. They dress like you, they talk like you, they depict themselves on social media just like you do. Same haircut, same everything. Would you want them to see what you do every weekend? Would you want your little sister, your little brother to do what you do on a Friday night? To put the same substances that you put into your body every weekend? As you lose control, because you can't stop hitting that vape, that cart? I ask that question all the time now. And when I ask that question, I watch as kids get uncomfortable and they shake their heads. You shake your head and you nod no. So if the answer to my question is no, then why are you doing it to yourself? Why do you put these substances in your body? Why are you so uncomfortable in your own skin? Why can't you be you anymore? I felt so uncomfortable in my own skin for so long. And drugs and alcohol gave me that relief that I've been desperately searching for. And when I got introduced to Oxy, that was the feeling. All along, I was a hurt little boy inside. All along, I felt like I was never seen or heard. All along, I felt like if I spoke up, I didn't have a voice. But the problem is I never let people really know the real me. So when I felt the relief from Oxy, I chased that feeling. And I would have chased that feeling to the end. That was my first solution to my problem. And it wasn't until I got sober that I realized that the problem was here all along. It was me. Drugs and alcohol always came second to that problem. I needed to work on myself. And there are so many of you in here who know that you need to be better, who want to be better for your parents, for your siblings. You know that you're not the good older brother, older sister like you used to be. I wish I had someone who leveled with me when I was your age. I wish I had someone who sat me down and said, "What are you doing with your life?" Because for me, the oldest of 4 boys, my 3 younger brothers idolized me. My 3rd youngest brother, who's 6 years younger than me, looks exactly like me. He's my best friend. And that little boy wanted nothing more than to be with his bigger brother. He wanted to hang out with me and my friends. He wanted to come with us on a weekend when we go watch soccer games. And so when that little boy came to me and said that he wanted to smoke weed for the first time, I thought it was cool to get my little brother stoned. I felt like it was better that he was doing it with me. That's the role model I became. The older brother that would do anything for his little brothers for so many years. Drugs and alcohol came into the picture. Me, I got my little brother stoned. At 20 years old, I can't go 1 minute without oxys in my system. And at 20 years old, the dope man calls me up and he says, "If you want a cop, you got to come through right now." See, the problem was it was a Friday night and I was babysitting my baby brother, the kid who was 3 months old when my dad died, the kid who was now 10 years old. And I looked at him and I said, "Come with me, we're going to the movies." And my little baby brother looked up from his iPad and had this huge smile on his face, and he ran to the car with me. And I brought that kid with me to Newark, New Jersey, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods. And I pulled up on a side street in Newark, New Jersey, and I hit the lights. And when I put the car in park, I ran around the other side of the door to the back side. And I said, "I'm going to lock this car. Don't try to leave." And he said, "Okay, Matt." I left my little brother in the car while I went to my dealer's house, 20, 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. You see, the problem is I lost track of time when I walked in there because I snorted the oxys that he had laid out for me. And I grabbed the first blunt that I saw on the table, and I started smoking it. And when I came back to that car to see my little brother sitting in the back seat of that car, completely unaware of where we were, completely unaware that for the last 45 minutes, his life was in danger. All that kid wanted to do was be around me. And in the most innocent way, he asked me, "Are we going to go to the movies now?" And I said, "Another time, bud." That's the role model I became. That's the monster I became. My brothers watched every single night as my mom would slap me in the face as I was not out on the couch. They thought it was funny. And there are kids in here right now who have someone in their life that every single day is taking a chance at dying. That little baby blue pill is tormenting your family. It's ruining your family's lives. And yet some of you in here laugh as I talk about this. Some of you laugh and think it's a joke. Would you laugh if your older brother was up here telling this story? Would you laugh if your older brother brought you on a drug run with him? Would you think it was funny then? You never know what someone's really going through. And I watched it in this school last year. I watched it as the kids that you look up to, who graduated, confided in me about their deepest, darkest secrets. Kids who have been bottling up things for so many years, feeling like they have no one to talk to. But those are the kids that you watch go drink and smoke and host parties on a weekend. Those are the kids whose parties you want to go to. And they're running away from something just like you are. They're fighting some sort of battle inside too. I know for a fact that there are some of you sitting with your best friends right now and you don't have honest conversations. You don't sit down with one another and know what you're really, really going through. What your friend's family life is like at home. You just come here and you want to be accepted. But you don't have deep and personal, honest conversations. I wish I could go back in time and speak up. I wish I could sit down with my friends when they ask me what's going on, and I could confide in them when I was 14, 15, 16 years old. Instead, all I did was drink and smoke with those kids. And when I graduated from Villanova, miraculously on time, awarded every opportunity in the world to do what I wanted to do, which is be just like my dad. I graduated, I got the job on Wall Street, I was making so much money, I didn't know what to do with it, except for buy drugs. And all the money that I made was gone. I was broke. And every day of my life would revolve around leaving my office in Midtown Manhattan on 45th and 6th and getting in a cab and taking up the St. Nicholas projects in Harlem and buying heroin and buying painkillers. And not even 8 years prior, I sat in a room just like this, laughing, thinking it would never be me. Snorting 30 of those little baby blue pills every single day just to feel normal. Popping 20 milligrams of Xanax every single day just to feel normal. Snorting an 8-ball of cocaine every single day just to feel normal. That's not normal. That's a sickness. 6 months into that glorious Wall Street job, everything in the world going for me, every check mark to every single thing that I thought meant success, I'm checking them all off. And 6 months into that job, I get arrested and charged with 3 felonies. My whole life is crumbling before my eyes. At 22 years old, every single thing that I've been awarded, I'm at risk of it taken away from me. At 22 years old, I'm facing 5 years in state prison because I couldn't say no. Because I gave in to peer pressure. And at 22 years old, with 3 felonies over my head, I had an opportunity. And that opportunity was to get clean and sober. That opportunity was to speak up and say, I need help. And I couldn't do it. 1 month. 1 month after being arrested and charged with 3 felonies, I couldn't get those little baby blue pills anymore. And I called up my friend Mike. And my friend Mike was my friend from high school who played lacrosse. And when we graduated high school, he went to a college near me and played lacrosse in college. And Mike and I smoked and drank every single weekend together in high school. And Mike and I snorted painkillers together for 2.5 years, and Mike graduated to harder substances. I knew what he was doing. So when I called him up and I said, I've been in withdrawal for 2 days, come to my house and get me right. Mike showed up an hour later. And Mike ran upstairs to my room in my mom's house. And when Mike opened the door to my room, he pulled out from his pocket a stack of wax paper baggies, rubber banded together. And he ripped apart that rubber band and took out 3 of those baggies. And at that point in my life, I vowed 2 things. I promised myself 2 things. I will never do heroin, and I will never stick a needle in my arm. And in an instant, I was ready to break one of those promises. In an instant, I watched as Mike ripped open 3 of those baggies and dumped this brown powder on my nightstand. And in an instant, I watched as he made a line out of that brown powder. And he handed me a rolled up $1 bill. And I snorted that heroin on my nightstand. I snorted 2 more bags of that heroin. And we got in his car and we drove to Patterson, another dangerous neighborhood in New Jersey, to pick up a brick of heroin, 50 bags. And when we picked up that brick, we go back to my mom's house. And this time when we get to my mom's house, Mike parks the car. And from the trunk of the car, Mike pulls out a backpack. And I watch as we run down in the basement of my mom's house. Mike darts over to the table in the center of the basement, the flip cup table. And I watch as my friend from high school, who in that same basement, we had high school parties. But this time it's just two addicts all alone. No more parties. And I watch as this kid opens up that backpack and pulls out a kit from that backpack, a needle and a spoon. And I watch as Mike ties himself up and cooks up heroin in my mom's basement. And I watch as my friend from high school loads it up. And I watch as my friend from high school puts that needle in his arm and pushes down on the plunger. And I watch that feeling hit him. And at 22 years old, I just graduated from Villanova 6 months prior. I held out my arm and I said, do it to me. I could barely watch this time as Mike cooked up heroin the second time. I could barely watch as he loaded up that needle. I could barely watch as he put that needle in my arm. I could barely watch as he pulled back on that plunger and I saw my blood go into that needle. And I could barely watch as he pushed down on it. But I felt the effects after he pushed down on that plunger. I felt that wave wash over me. And it was too powerful for me. And I fell out. And my friend from high school picks me up and puts me on the couch and puts a blanket over me and I fell asleep. And the next morning I woke up and he was gone. And I frantically start calling his cell phone. He won't pick up. And finally he does, and I ask him, where do I get more needles? You see, the reason why I vowed I never put a needle in my arm is because I always heard the moment you do, you never go back. The moment you put a needle in your arm, you never go back. And one time I was hooked. And he told me, listen, go to a pharmacy and walk in there and ask for insulin syringes. So I snort a bunch of the heroin that I have, and I go to the CVS my family had been filling prescriptions for 30 years. And when I got there, I run inside that pharmacy all strung out, sweating profusely. And I run up to that pharmacist and I ask him, hey, I want to buy insulin syringes. And he looks at me and he says, I can't sell you these, man. You have to have a prescription. And I'm all frazzled and confused, so I shrug my shoulders and I walk out. I run back to my car and I snort the rest of the heroin that I had. And I consider that man God that day. Because if I had walked into any other pharmacy in this state, in this country, besides the CVS, any other pharmacy in this country, Walgreens, Rite Aid, I would have walked out with those needles. CVS is the only pharmacy you need a prescription to get them. And for the next 6 to 9 months, I battled the state and my lawyer, because my lawyer kept saying, you need to go to rehab. You need to get clean and sober. You're facing 5 years in state prison if you fail one drug test in this state, no matter what program they put you on. And I got graced and put on probation for 1 year in New Jersey. So for 1 year, I needed to be clean and sober. 2 drug tests, I was told. I'd have 2 drug tests in 1 year. If I passed the first one, they might not call me again. And I get the letter in the mail saying that my drug test is scheduled for July 22nd. So for 2 months, I have notice of this drug test. And for 2 months, I couldn't get clean and sober. And 1 week before that drug test, I called up a dealer and I said, what do I do? And he says, well, I walk in there and I drink this mouthwash. They swab my saliva, they put it back in the vial, and it shows that I'm clean and sober. So with him, I go to a smoke shop and I buy 2 bottles of that mouthwash. And I buy 2 bags of synthetic urine. And my plan on the morning of that test was to go in there with that fake urine strapped to my leg. And on the morning of that drug test, I drink that mouthwash right when I walk out. I walked out of my grandma's house that morning. And as I left her house, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. You see, for so many years, I talked about that feeling of looking at myself in the mirror and hating who I saw. Well, this time I looked at myself in the mirror and I didn't recognize who I saw. I weighed 250 pounds. I had no color in my face. My body, my metabolism was shutting down on me. And I looked at myself and I thought, what am I doing with my life? I have to go into my job in Midtown Manhattan in 1 hour. And I'm coming up with an excuse because I have to go take a drug test at a probation center. What is going on with me? I couldn't see my life with it or without it anymore. And people call that the jumping off point. I call it despair. I pulled up to that drug testing center and I parked my car, and when I did, I snorted 4 blues right in the car. And when I snorted them, I started drinking that mouthwash. And I walked inside that center and I sat in the waiting room and I looked around. And I surveyed the room and I saw one guy in one corner in a sweatsuit. And on the other side of the room, I saw another guy in a sweatsuit. And they're trying to sweat out whatever toxins they still had in their body. And I'm laughing to myself, thinking, I don't belong here. I'm too good for this place. I'm too good for these people. I'm going to walk in there. I'm going to pass this drug test. I'm going to walk out, go back to my Wall Street job, and continue the life that I'm living. And with 20 minutes left to clean saliva, I get called in. And when I walk inside my PO's office, I sit down at her desk, and on her keyboard is the mouth swab in the packaging. And I look at that keyboard. I see that mouth swab, and I'm laughing, again, in my mind, thinking, this is it. This is the easiest con I'm ever going to pull off. And we go back and forth exchanging a few words, and when we finally finish our sentences, we make eye contact, and she asked me, are you going to pass this drug test this morning? And I said, yes, I'm going to pass. And again, she looks at me and she asked me, are you sure you're going to pass this drug test this morning? And I said, yes, I'm going to pass. And I felt the confidence coming out of my body as I said those words. She looks back down and she grabs a cup and she says, okay, go pee in this cup. And I grab that cup from her and I stand up. And as I leave her office to walk into the bathroom, I realize that fake urine isn't strapped to my leg. And so I walk inside that bathroom. And as I do, a gentleman walks in there with me because he's supposed to watch me through what they call an angled mirror. And through that angled mirror, he can see if I have anything, if I pull anything out of my pants, etc. I walk up to that stall. And as I approach and begin to pee in that cup, I look to my left and I see he's looking at the door. And as I'm peeing into that cup, I'm thinking to myself, I could have gotten away with it. I finish, I hand him the cup and I walk back into her office and I sit down. And when I do, she walks in and she says, for 2 months you had notice of this test. I don't know if this is a cry for help or you genuinely can't stop. And I cut her off, and with all sincerity in the world, I said, I want to stop. I want to get sober. I really, really do. She said, come back in 1 month. If you come back in 1 month and you're clean and sober, I'll drop all your charges. If you come back in 1 month and you fail, I'm sending you to jail that day. And I shook her hand. I said, okay, deal. And I left. And I went back to my mom's house and no one was there. And when I got to my mom's house, I paced back and forth debating what to do. And I rolled myself up a joint and I made myself a drink. And I took that joint and I ran to the backyard. And when I walked out on that backyard patio, I sparked up that joint and I started smoking it. And when I looked up in the sky, I just saw this crystal clear blue sky day. And it brought me right back to the morning of 9/11. And 2 weeks before 9/11, my dad talked to my mom about wanting to quit. 2 weeks before, my dad said to my mom that he felt his death was imminent. And 2 weeks before my dad died, he said to my mom, when I die, I'm going to come back as a fly, buzzing around on every single wall. And on September 12, 2001, my mom was told to look for those signs. And that evening, a fly landed on my mom's nightstand. That was her sign my dad wasn't coming home. On that sunny day in July 2015, I looked up and I said, Dad, please give me a sign. I need some help. And this fly lands on the railing I'm leaning against. And as I'm smoking this joint, I'm watching as this fly is moving around in a circle over and over and over and looking at me. And I begin to swat at it with my hand. And it won't fly away. And I pulled out my phone and I recorded it so I could capture that moment. I still have that video. And for the first time ever, I put out that half-lit joint and I ran inside my house and I pulled out my cell phone and I called up a detox. And I said, I'm not sober right now. I need a bed tonight. Please get me in tonight. They said, well, we can't get in until Friday morning. I said, fine, book it. I want that bed. 2 days later, I checked myself into that detox. That was July 24, 2015. By the grace of God, I've been sober one day at a time since that day. For the last 9 years, I haven't had to put a drink or drug in my body to change the way I feel. For the last 9 years, I felt every single powerful feeling that I suppressed for so many years. And it's not easy. But I do this to make a connection with one kid. Because at 6 months sober, my third youngest brother, the same kid that I got stoned, called me up. And he said something on that phone call that led me to believe my uncle, if he hadn't already, was trying to abuse him. I couldn't let anything happen to my brother. And I stood up and I spoke up. And he was facing 20 years in state prison, my uncle. And he got sentenced to 7 years. Got let out in 4. The thing is, for the first time in my life, I tapped into that inner voice. For the first time in my life, I wasn't that scared little boy anymore. For the first time in my life, I could speak up as a man and do what was right. Not just for me, but for someone else. And so, being back here today, I'm extremely grateful to be back here so quickly. Because where I left off with a lot of you last year, there was a lot of you that vowed to be better. There was a lot of you in here that acknowledge that you're struggling. There are some of you who want to speak up, but you're so afraid to do so because you're afraid of being judged. Your closest friends sit with you, and yet they have no idea what you're going through. How can you consider someone your best friend if they don't know the real you? Are you having honest conversations with each other? Are you talking to each other about being the best versions of yourselves? Or are you just co-signing each other? Are you just thinking it's okay that every single weekend your lives revolved around getting as messed up as possible? That you know for a fact you can't stop vaping or hitting those carts? You see, the thing is, I see so many kids ruin their lives over those carts. There are kids in here right now who are laughing as I say this. Like, the scariest thing to me is you think it's a joke. If I could put a picture of myself, what I looked like when I was your age, laughing the same way you laugh, I would do anything to go back to 2006 to hear this message. I would do anything to actually try to listen. Not just hear the words, but actually listen and apply it to my life. There are so many of you in here who are losing your lives right now. Every day you're sacrificing for drugs and alcohol. You're too afraid to admit it. You look forward to that party on a Friday, Saturday night. All week you talk about that party. Who's going to pick up this? Who's going to get that? Who's hosting? Every single weekend you run away. And yet, because it's not painkillers, because it's not powders, you don't associate with what I'm saying. But the biggest thing to me today in every single school I go into is the amount of kids that know they can't go 1 second without that vape. That vape stays right there on the nightstand, within reach every night. You wake up, just in case you wake up in the middle of the night, you grab that real quick. The power that has over you. is too daunting for you to admit. It all starts with drugs like vaping and weed and booze. And you think it's never going to evolve into something else, and then one day it does. And my hope is that you can look deep down inside of each and every one of you today and reevaluate and hold each other and yourselves accountable. Admit that you're not the best version of yourself, but also realize that from here on out you can pivot and do better. You can speak up about what you're going through, and you can know in your heart that it's okay. There are some of you who sit here and feel so alone. I know that feeling. I know that feeling. It hurts to sit with your closest friends and feel they just don't know me. I encourage you to let people know the real you. Through all your flaws, through all your scars. We all have something inside of us that drives us. I acknowledged mine and started speaking up, and it saved my life. Today I've taken my pain and it's become my purpose. The biggest silver lining I have with sobriety is the fact that I can use my deepest, darkest secrets, the negative nightmare experiences that I lived, and channel them into something good for someone else. My nightmare can become a beacon of hope and light for someone in here who's also in that darkness. And you can know that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and that it's okay to not be okay. I have the biggest blessing today of being able to feel. It's not easy. It's not easy doing this. But it's better to feel something than nothing at all. I want to thank you all so much for your undivided attention. And I want you to know that if you feel alone, I'm here for you. God bless. Thank you.